Hello and welcome to BQ Prime. The Union Budget was presented on Wednesday. Today, we're joined by Dr. Anantha Nageswaran, Chief Economic Advisor to the Union Government, to help us read the fine lines in the budget. Hello, sir, and thank you so very much for taking time out for us today.
You're welcome.
So to begin with, one of the biggest figures in focus undoubtedly was the Capex figure at 10 lakh crore. Do you believe that the government will actually be able to spend all of it in the next fiscal, especially considering this year we did see a little bit of a downward revision to the Capex outlay?
I think you're referring to the 20,000 crore lower estimate in the revised estimates. And that is coming primarily on account of some states not being able to use their full allowance of the 50-year interest-free loan. If you look at the union government in the last couple of years, including the ongoing financial year, they have been able to meet and spend their capital expenditure. So it's our belief that states also are ramping up capacity, and some states are doing better, and even the union government in terms of utilizing capital expenditure, etc. So overall, we are confident that the budgeted capex of 10 lakh crores between the union government, predominantly, of course, and the states will be utilized.
All right. So you also expressed confidence that private capex should be able to see a revival soon, considering the efforts put in by the central government. But do you believe that global headwinds, just continuing economic uncertainties, mean that private capex might not see an immediate revival, but only see a revival only maybe in the next, like the next to next fiscal instead? I mean, what's it looking like?
Yeah, I mean, if there are global headwinds of considerable strength, of course, whatever we assume will not necessarily play out, and that's exactly how things have happened in the last several years. There are certain assumptions made. Nobody pencils in a geopolitical conflict that erupted in Europe last year, which has obviously had a big impact on prices of commodities. And naturally, that leads to some caution on the part of private sector to invest, etc. So all statements are when it comes to economics and public matters are conditional statements. They are conditional on a particular set of assumptions as to how the world will evolve. If there are geopolitical or geo-economic headwinds, then to that extent, the expectations will be impacted. But what we have seen is that the financial year, despite all the headwinds, private sector has invested based on bottom-up earnings data that they provide. That the Axis Bank has gathered, and we have taken their estimates from that. And they are able to show that collated from a bottom-up process that 3.3 lakh crores of private capex has taken place just in the first half year. And that is more than 2.4 lakh crores that was spent in the previous financial year, April to September 2021. So there is, despite all the headwinds, the signs that private sector capex is slowly reviving. It was 2.1 lakh crores in financial year 2021 in the first 6 months, and then 2.4 lakh crores in 21-22, and 3.3 in the current financial year. So we believe that this trend will continue and gather momentum.
All right. So another thing that I did want to ask you about was welfare spending. So, for instance, MGNREGA saw a cut, and while, of course, sorry?
What was the first one?
So MGNREGA saw a cut in outlay. Okay. And while, of course, other schemes such as the Awas Yojana has seen higher outlay, do you believe that you might have to, over the year, once again increase outlay on schemes such as MGNREGA?
Look, I mean, the reason why MGNRA allocation, budget allocation is lower is explained by the fact that the PM Awas Yojana rural has gone up by 172% from 20,000 to just under 55,000 crores. And Jal Jeevan Mission allocation has gone up from 60,000 to 70,000 crores. So both these things put together will lead to higher spending and hiring as well. So, I mean, you cannot construct homes without labor. And therefore, much of the labor that may be utilizing the Rural Employment Guarantee Program will be utilized in the construction activity for PM Awas Yojana Rural and also in the implementation of Jal Jeevan Mission. And that is why the extra allocation to these two programs and the allocation to the PM in NREGS, MGNREGS should be seen in totality. The second reason behind the lower allocation is that as the recovery gathers strength and longevity, there will be a greater absorption of rural youth and rural labor force into the overall employment, and that could also result in a lower demand for Manrega. So we have basically made the assumption that the natural economic growth, and in particular the rural spending programs of the government, will absorb rural employment. And in spite of that, if it turns out that the rural employment guarantee demands are higher, then they will be met as they have been met in the previous years as well.
All right. So, in the economic survey presented this year, a significant part of the survey said that recovery was complete. And of course, while multiple high frequency indicators also continue to denote continuing sustained economic recovery, do you truly believe that economic recovery is complete? In the sense, what about scarring from the pandemic, maybe on the informal sector, maybe on other parts of the economy?
Many of the sectors, which we track, both the manufacturing and services, have regained and even surpassed the activity levels of 2019-20, including contact-based services, hospitality sectors, tourism, civil aviation, domestic international passenger traffic, etc. And then you look at air cargo movement, etc. Yes, you are right that, for example, learning losses will probably be bridged over time, and some people's health status may also be affected by long COVID, etc. So there will be some scarring. But from the macroeconomic perspective, we feel that sectors have reached or surpassed the levels that prevailed in the financial year ending March 2020. And the reason why we also said is that recovery is complete is we have had 2 consecutive years of good growth. Of course, 22-23 is not over yet, and the estimation is 7%. 21-22 is 8.7%. And therefore, our belief is that now we should look ahead rather than talking about a recovery from the pandemic or a pandemic response. We should look ahead to the medium term and see what would drive medium-term growth and what more can be done to enhance it. And that is the theme of the second chapter in the economic survey.
Got it. Thank you. Over the coming year, you have outlined multiple headwinds to the outlook presented in the economic survey. One of those is, of course, tightening monetary policy. Do you believe that, how do you see that playing out? Do you believe that even though at this point, we're not seeing the impact, like we're not seeing higher interest rates, debtor consumption or Capex, do you think that there's a possibility that will change in the coming fiscal?
I'm not sure I completely understood your question. I mean, I have mentioned headwinds for the economic growth in 23-24, but I have said also in the survey that predominantly they come from external factors.
Right.
As far as India is concerned, in the first half of the current financial year, data tell us that both private consumption and capital formation are probably at their highest in several years, and high-frequency indicators confirm that the momentum has carried forward into the third quarter.
Absolutely, so that's right. But do you think that the next year things might play out a little differently and we might see some impact of higher interest rates kick in, maybe debtor consumption to some extent or debtor Capex? Is that a possibility?
We have said that those are all possibilities, but at the moment, the expectation is that at some point, monetary policy tightening in the developed world would cease, and interest rates would peak, and the economic slowdown in those countries would probably result in some meaningful reduction in commodity prices, perhaps boost to our consumption as well as private capital formation. But the risk factors are what you mentioned. That is what we have also covered in the survey. should a global economy actually experience a softer landing or even continued growth, then it might result in higher interest rates even further, continue or it getting extended for a longer period, and it might also result in higher crude oil demand. So in that sense, we have mentioned specifically that while our base case is 6.5%, we do see the downside risk slightly higher than the upside. That is why the range is 6 to 6.8. And we didn't pick the midpoint there. We picked 6.5, which means between 6.5 and 6, and between 6.5 and 6.8, there is a difference. So the downside is 0.5, upside is 0.3. That clearly tells you that we feel that there are more downside risk than upside risk to our baseline estimate.
All right. So something else that I wanted to understand a little bit more about was the employment scenario. And then while, of course, you have mentioned that employment indicators have been improving, PLFS, for instance, a large part of the improvement has also come from self-employment, for instance. And then, of course, the current budget does intend to generate employment by way of the huge Capex outlay and the PM Awas Yojana. But do you feel that's enough? Do you see need for more employment generation, reskilling or upskilling in the labor force?
Reskilling, upskilling initiatives are also there in the budget, talking about establishing 150 more nursing colleges, and then PM Vikas 4.0, which will teach more appropriate and relevant skills for 21st century, and also even the model Ekalavya schools in the tribal regions will also create a greater literacy and education, preparing them better for the future. And the entire public investment program, as I mentioned in the case of the PMAY rural budget, public investment cannot happen without putting more boots on the ground. So in that sense, the massive Capex that is planned will also result in employment generation. And then as the private sector continues to invest, it will also hire more people. So in that sense, there are both public and private sector initiatives, as well as you pointed out, skilling, reskilling and upskilling initiatives that would drive the employment growth. And the reason why the government continues to put emphasis on Capex is that historical studies in India and elsewhere point out that Capex spending has a higher job generation multiplier.
Sure. Okay. All right. Sir, if I may, my last question is not so much to do with the budget, but I did want to ask about the census. At this point, there are concerns that first, because of the pandemic, we saw the census being delayed. There are concerns now that the absence of a census being rolled out now is beginning to hamper data quality, for instance, inflation basket, and other such things. So any comments on that?
I understand that the surveys have been initiated and these things don't get completed given the size of the country within a short period. But I understand that these surveys have been initiated already.
All right, sir. Thank you so much for taking time out for us
You're
today.
welcome.
This was most
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay tuned to BQ Prime for continuing updates on the economy.